Hey guys, I'm Mike, and today we'll be talking about something horror fans have been discussing in our blacked out bedroom since Terrifier 2 graced the screen a couple years back. And that question is, should Art the Clown stand beside of Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees, Pinhead, Leatherface, and Freddy Krueger as one of the true icons of horror at this point? Today we'll talk about that and why the answer to that is a resounding yes! Welcome to Best of the Bad Guys, where we celebrate the best of horror's worst villains on a case-by-case basis. For starters, we'll talk about some of the reasons why some people might say that Art is not a main horror icon already, and also, just a fair warning, there may be Terrifier 3 spoilers ahead. Let's start with longevity. Some of you folks are no doubt angrily typing as you read this that Art simply hasn't been around long enough to earn the title of horror icon. Well, put down your finger guns for a moment and remember that Art has been around for nearly a decade already, first appearing in the anthology horror film All Hallows Eve in 2013. For comparison, at that point in the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, Freddy had already been through a whopping 7 films, Jason had already taken Manhattan, Jigsaw was already in 3D, most of even the best horror franchises were already on their way out. Art is just getting started. Imagine if Terrifier 4 and possibly 5 continue this trend. It's possible we still haven't seen the best that Terrifier has to offer, and this is where the pendulum usually starts to swing in the other direction. Since his first appearance in All Hallows Eve, Art's had 3 films in the Terrifier franchise, with 2 of them exceeding all expectations at the box office. With at least a 4th on the way, maybe a 5th, even though creator and director Damien Leone will likely wrap up his story there, there's nothing that says another creative team will never pick up Art's tiny hat for their own take on the character, or that he'll return to it later in his career. It happens to all of them. Hell, if Dimension Films were in charge of this franchise, they would have just given a bum on the street an Egg McMuffin to direct the next installment in the franchise so that they could keep the rights. And don't forget the inevitable remake. The point is, there's no end to how long the Terrifier franchise could terrify. I will admit that one thing most of these other horror icons have going for them that Art simply does not have is the fact that their first film was a bona fide classic. I think Terrifier is great, but let's be honest, it's no Nightmare on Elm Street, Scream, or Halloween. Hell, it didn't even get a theatrical release initially. Art had to work his way and his budget up. But this is why I consider Terrifier 2 Art's The Dark Knight. Introducing a game-changing hero in Sienna, where the former had upped the ante with Heath Ledger's portrayal of the Joker. Now let's compare some other areas where Art stacks up against his peers. Though the franchise is so much more than that, the first thing we talk about when we think about the Terrifier franchise is the kills. Those sweet, scrub my eyeballs with bleach and call the therapist. We can forget about Mom for a little while. We have a whole other bag of issues to discuss: kills. Call me Vicky in the attic pleasing myself with a shard of glass, but I think it's solidified. No one kills like Art the Clown. He is the most gruesome killer franchise horror have ever witnessed. Sure, Michael loves his post-murder arts and crafts, Freddy can do things in your dreams no other killer could ever compare to, though we have proven Art can start some shit in Dreamland too, so don't count out the future getting wicked there. Jason has some hilarious and inventive brute force murder death kills of course, but there's simply no one as brutal as Art, so we can put that baby to bed. To stand unequivocally above all others in the Mount Rushmore of horror icons in any topic has gotta count for something, right? He hasn't just killed well, he has literally made an expectation of it. He has created a tradition unlike any other, like the Masters. Starting with an unforgettable moment in his very first featured film, a kill that I call the Vagisaw, trademark. The moment Art brought that chainsaw down into that orifice, things changed. Each upcoming sequel would inevitably be expected to have a dismemberable moment just like this one, hopefully topping the previous entry. And to this point they have. In Terrifier 2, Art maims, dismembers, and literally peels the skin off a teenage girl before rubbing her wounds in bleach and salt, like some kind of even more satanic Guy Fieri. In Terrifier 3, Art as Santa Claus brings back the chainsaw, inserting it into a man's rectum, creating its very own horror trope for its franchise, something that's not easy to do. In the same way that James Bond films have their over-the-top action sequences, Terrifier has at least one scene guaranteed to make you squeal in disgust. Saw had their gross-out traps, Scream has their killer reveals, and Terrifier has at least one centerpiece of truly depraved dismemberment in each entry. Art doesn't stop there. Almost every kill in the last 2 films has been original, visually impressive, and worthy of putting your fork down and thinking about your sins for a while. Art has carved out his very own niche when it comes to the death of his victims, in a genre that thrives on it. Speaking of thriving, check out JoBlo's merch store to get awesome stuff like this coffee cup that says, "F you, pay me."
Before we continue with our video, here's a reminder to click the store tab on any of our JoBlo channels and browse our collection of the latest and freshest designs in our merch store. Go get you some.
But it's all gore and no story, people who have never actually watched Terrifier 2 or 3 will shout. This leads us to our next explanation of why Art should be in the Horror Icon Hall of Fame immediately: his fantastical and ever-expanding lore. It doesn't even need to begin until his third on-screen appearance in Terrifier 2, because a clown that looks like that, makes faces like that, and does depraved things like that to people's nether regions is scary all by himself. For at least a while, Leone and his crew knew this and let Art's essence waft over the audience just long enough to start asking questions. Wait, so this isn't just some dude in a clown outfit who snapped one day because someone told him guac was extra? Well, where does he come from? How do we stop him? Most horror icons have a great backstory, but it isn't necessarily a requirement. The lore of Ghostface, for instance, lies in its ever-changing motives and revolving door of humans behind the mask, though one could argue it all originates from Maureen Prescott being kind of a tramp. We all know Jason's backstory with his mommy. For my money, the best horror backstories are those that leave their mystery boxes open, even deep into the sequels. The questions that still to this day surround Michael Myers are what make him so appealing. Why did a random suburban kid just snap one day and become an unstoppable murder machine? When Rob Zombie tried to answer that mythical question with a shrug on a trailer park breakfast, it became infinitely less interesting. I think the masterful gambit of a horror franchise composer is their ability to ask more questions while slowly divulging answers, and this is something that Leone and crew have become masters at. Not only do fans of the Terrifier franchise hang on to each new installment with bated breath and a barf bag in hand, but to be enlightened by the next step in its ever-evolving story. We're learning with each film a bit more about what Art is, what his intentions are, and where all this is going. Where are we heading with these obvious references to the good and evil in religion, not to mention the intrigue surrounding his sidekicks and the little pale girl in Victoria? Terrifier 3 managed to add a demonic depth to the character of Vicky while also leaving us with more questions to explore. Even the Terrifier ride itself from the park in the second film has its own mysterious and strange backstory where several people were mysteriously murdered there. This comes from the novelization of Terrifier 2 by author Tim Wagner. And that's another place Terrifier is very different. Instead of going back and trying to recapture that classic essence of that original film, it's forging ahead into new territory with each and every installment. This isn't a franchise we can expect to copy and paste stuff from the past in order to make a quick buck. It's making slasher horror feel dangerous again, which is something that the Halloween and Scream franchises did in their respective debuts. You'll notice I haven't even begun to mention all the world building and questions that surround Sienna and her father, because that, my friends, is the next point in my argument that Art is well on his way to cementing forever horror icon status: his final girl. A main adversary is a must for an iconic horror villain, a victim turned heroine who overcomes all odds, the antithesis to the darkness of the villains we came to watch do murder. Without likable characters, we'd all just be a bunch of sick f***s watching innocent people be slaughtered for fun. Or sitting through Halloween Resurrection again. I'm going to say something bold. I believe even with just 2 film appearances under her belt, Lauren Lavera's Sienna has already cemented herself as one of the best final girls in slasherdom. Complete with her own badass synth music, a wonderful throwback to A Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors, we're introduced to Sienna crafting a Halloween costume based on a character her artist father made for her before his untimely passing. We quickly find out that she's a good daughter, sister, and friend. She's not an awkward church mouse afraid of human contact. She's not just a sweet popular girl who happens to be dating the school douchebag only is somehow too dumb to notice it. She's not walking around trying to convince us that she's Sarah Connor. She somehow escapes tired conventional final girl genre tropes without ever seeming like she's trying. She's both relatable and a natural badass. She even has a cool reason to wear a kick-ass costume. She's also not just another supposedly helpless teenage girl. So while waxing philosophical with my buddy the other day talking about horror icons, he asked me, who do you think would win in a fight, Jason Voorhees or Batman? Which made me laugh because of course the answer is Batman. And this brings us to one of the biggest paradoxes about the horror slasher genre as a whole. We're watching supernatural forces, unstoppable supernatural forces, do battle with young, dumb, or timid teenagers, and often losing. If Laurie Strode, who's frightened by the sound of Pop-Tarts finishing up in the toaster, can defeat Michael Myers, what chance would he have against Batman? I'm not trying to cast poor aspersions on my favorite films of all time. It comes with the territory, and we see ourselves in the underdogs overcoming the inevitable. I get it, and it's great, and I wouldn't change a thing. I'm simply stating that Sienna is a breath of fresh air in more ways than one. While it hasn't been fully divulged to us yet, she's definitely of a power that serves the final girl's purpose in a different way. As silly of an idea as it was, how much fun was it to watch Tina Shepard and her telekinetic abilities square off against Jason at the end of The New Blood? I can't escape the feeling that we're watching something like that idea and slowly divulging it to the audience in a way that's going to come across as believable and plausible by the time all of her powers are fully unveiled. So we have our kills, top notch, our lore, ever expanding, and our final girl, a lovable badass. What else makes Art stand out? His personality. While Michael and Jason are silent and only emote physically, sometimes unintentionally hilarious in the best of ways, Freddy and Chucky both have the propensity to be hilarious in their dickishness. Pinhead will dress your ass down like some kind of BDSM Shakespeare, and on and on. A prerequisite for a truly great slasher should be that they have a distinct personality, and Art is again his own man. He doesn't speak, although there's one scene in Terrifier 3 where it seems like he's trying to use Vicky to speak for him, which is another interesting layer of lore for the Terrifier franchise, but my god does he ever emote. He's totally hilarious at times, and he can go from being hilarious to downright terrifying with just the simple drop of his facial muscles and a stare that could burn a hole through adamantium. Though actor Mike Gianelli did a more than admirable job as the character in the aforementioned All Hallows Eve, there's no doubt David Howard Thornton has breathed a unique life into this character and made it his own. His physical comedy in moments like this where he runs into a room excited like a child on Christmas and holding the salt has made him the Jim Carrey of horror in my eyes. And that's why I fully consider Art the Clown a full-blown horror icon already at this point. You know what's funny to me? One of the things us horror fans do is we always seem to long for the days of old. You know, when Freddy Krueger was on MTV or when slashers were taking over the box office. But in a world where an unrated horror movie just broke a bunch of box office records and we just saw Art the Clown and Sienna ringing the bell at the stock market, it makes me think of the quote from Andy in The Office where he said, "I wish there was a way to know you're in the good old days before you've actually left them." Because we're witnessing the birth of a horror icon right now.